what they learned. So, okay, so in the United States, we have alternatives, and all the alternatives are evaluated equally, and they're all up front, and every alternative needs to be feasible. So the first alternative, typically, whenever you do a government EIS, it's always a no action. So that just shows what, if you didn't implement any actions from this EIS, that's a no action. And then alternative 2, which is very interesting, what they're doing in alternative 2 is saying, hey, what do we do if we don't fund the Mitchell Act hatcheries? So that's a really unique part of alternative 2 that's separate from any other alternative. They're trying to figure, okay, what would happen if we did that? And then under here, they have 2 different types of conservation goals. One is intermediate and one is stronger. So the stronger conservation goals will be more strict. And the intermediate are still conservation goals, but they're not strict. And then new hatchery programs would be initiated for a couple of these alternatives, alternative 4 and 5. And then they decided that they want changes. So now they want, after alternative 1, is every action alternative is going to have BMPs that are going to be implemented from now on. And then monitoring, evaluation, and research would continue, would start up under the action alternatives. And then they also separated it into lower and upper river. And so they kind of did an experiment there because there's different hatcheries and different programs. Tribal harvest is primarily in the upper river. So there was some research that they needed to understand. And that's how they separated lower and upper river. So here, I know this is a little bit complicated, but what you really just need to see is the end. And that is that there was originally 143 million fish, and like it said, almost 50% is supported by Mitchell programs. So under alternative 2, if you lose the Mitchell Act funds, then you drop down to only 51 million fish. Under alternative 3, the Mitchell Act will have funded programs, and these conservation measures that they're doing give you 74% of what was previously under alternative 1. And so alternative 4 is 82% of alternative 1, and alternative 5 is 77%. But it's a little bit of different mix, like I was telling you. But the important thing for you to understand is that no more would we have 143 million fish. So we've got significant reductions. And the impact, and you'll see later on, is to the Native Americans, because they're the ones that historically had that right to fish. So, as I mentioned before, we review fish, socioeconomics, environmental justice, wildlife, water quality, equality, and human health. And the unique thing in the United States is that we have this new regulation called environmental justice. And so we have to do an analysis that says, how is this going to affect low-income people? How will this EIS affect low-income people? And how will this EIS affect tribes? Because they're minorities, or any other type of minority. Here, for this type of project, tribes are the primary, the recipients of what are the impacts. Okay, so now here's the results. And under here, the genetic impacts, and I'm only giving you some of the results, but the genetic impacts are that if you look under current conditions, half the populations meet these strong metrics through the modeling, and 58% met intermediate metrics. So then under alternative 2, when you dramatically reduce production, you get the highest amount of, so in other words, the number of fish produced is the biggest indicator of genetic impacts. But then under 3, 4, and 5, you can see that they're doing better, and the different alternatives, are much better than alternative 1. And then you look at the number of hatchery programs. Now you can see that there are 178, and you can see under alternative 2, we're going to lose a lot of hatchery programs, but we're still going to lose some. In other words, they're identifying those hatchery programs that have the biggest impact on fish, and they want to close them down. But in addition, there are some new hatchery programs that will come up, so they're trying to do a little bit of compensation. Okay, and then the ecological impacts, you can see that there's competition and predation, and each of the action alternatives reduce the ecological impacts. And then the total number of weirs, and weirs do damage to some fish, because when the fish hit the weir, then they could be, like physically impacted. But the weirs are really important, and we've got to stop the hatchery origin fish from getting up those streams. So therefore, you can see that as you increase the number of weirs, it's better for the natural origin fish. So under socioeconomics, you can see that now we're talking about harvest. So we did this extensive modeling to determine, okay, now we have all this fewer fish, how will that impact harvest? So you can see here that under alternative 2, you lose 50% of your harvest. So, but under these other alternatives, harvest drops, but not as significantly. In addition, you can see the economic impacts, where you lose 38% in millions of dollars, and 13% 5 and 4. So alternative 5 doesn't really have as big of an impact on the overall economic impacts. And that one, this one covers for like 5 or 6 different, analyses. I just didn't put that up. And then that's for the Columbia River, and the same thing for the, so in other words, we analyzed in the Columbia River what the impacts were, and then we analyzed on the ocean. And, in the ocean, the coast of Washington, Puget Sound, what are the economic impacts? So it's very extensive socioeconomic analysis. So then you can see that tribal harvest by number of fish. You can see that how the tribal harvest is impacted under environmental justice, and then you can see how the revenue is. And the way alternative 6, because we have the upper river, lower river, you can see that alternative 5, because it kind of protects the area where the tribal fishermen are, is actually an advantage for them. So, and now here's the next one. This is interesting, and that is that Caspian terns and bald eagles are very dependent on these hatchery origin fish. So the populations are currently increasing, but once we reduce the hatchery origin fish, their populations will decrease. And the killer whale, there's only 88 of this stock in the world now. And they could be significantly impacted by total, this one would really affect their abundance. But they're not totally dependent they primarily eat Chinook, and they have this preference for Chinook salmon over any other species of salmon. But they don't occur that frequently in the Columbia River Basin, because they don't really come into the freshwater, they just come into the estuary. So they're not that dependent. So therefore, when you have a smaller reduction, it's not that big of a deal to the killer whale. And then the California sea lions, I don't know if any of you know what's occurring right now, but the California sea lions are very smart, and over the years, what they have learned to do is they go right up to the dams and they hang out waiting for the salmon to come in, and then they just feast on the salmon. So we've done a lot of things like eliminating the California sea lions, shooting them, and then everybody gets up in arrears. But California sea lions are very abundant, and they would likely decrease. But the scientists are not in support. The public, they don't really understand the complexities of allowing these California sea lions to basically decimate all salmon and steelhead in the Columbia River Basin. And they're increasing all the time. And then the Steller sea lion is a listed species. However, it's not dependent on salmon in the Columbia River Basin. So even though it's a listed species, it is increasing. Any change because of the analysis that we find out what they feed on and where they eat, they will not be affected by this by these changes. And then under human health, because of these new best management practices, and we're going to apply those best management practices over all the action alternatives, that there will be potential decrease in use of antibiotics and no change exposure to pathogens. And then under water quality, they all have their permits that they need. There's government permits that they need just to make sure they minimize water quality impacts. But there would be improvements to water quality under the action alternatives. So we published the EIS in July, and we got, and this is we actually have 2 different types of comments. One could be testimony, the other is written letter or email. And so under you can see the number of comments that we've received. the EIS is very complicated, and so therefore the general public don't really understand what's occurring. But the hatchery operators know exactly what's occurring as well as the tribes, because they're the ones that are going to be impacted. So here you can see the number of letters, the total number of comments. We've got 1,000 comments, and then what we have to do now is respond to all of those comments. And so this is the last slide, or almost, but you know, see, these are some of the questions they asked. They said, you know, is the purpose and need right? You know, why are you, if you're most interested in Mitchell Act funds, why are you implementing this on other hatcheries that don't have Mitchell Act funds? But you know, NIM said, look, we got to study this for the Endangered Species Act. And then the other thing is that people are really concerned. They're saying if you reduce all these hatchery fish, hey, you are not meeting other policies in place to protect tribal fishery resources. So another one is, hey, wait a minute, you know, we want another alternative. We want an alternative that increases production. I mean, there's some benefits, you know. You're just focusing on the negative. We want you to focus on the positive. So that was one of them. And then they said, if you're going to reduce the hatchery fish, then you have to mitigate for that. Give us some sort of mitigation. You know, just don't reduce, you know, reduce our subsistence fishery without mitigating for that. And then the next one is they wanted the benefits of the hatcheries. We didn't really focus on benefits. We really focused on risks. And then they wanted NIMS to collaborate with other agencies, and NIMS will not do that because this is their own decision, and they don't want another agency to come in and affect their decisions under the Endangered Species Act, because they're the decision makers on that. But that was requested. Another one, you know, some of them said, hey, you know, we want independent review. We want someone else to come in here and tell you you're wrong. You know? So I'm not sure if we'll do that. And then future actions is they want to know what is NIMS going to do with this EIS. How are they going to apply it? And then the last one was hey, you know, is your modeling effort reflecting the best data? So what we're going to do now is that we're responding to the comments, and we recognize that this study's been going on for years. The modeling is now 5 years old. Things have changed, so we're going to remodel everything all over again. That's another year. But we are going to remodel. We're going to make changes in the EIS based on their comments. We're going to develop a preferred alternative. So now we learned from all these things, and now we're going to put out the preferred alternative. And it looks like we're moving towards a supplemental EIS. And then we'll put that out for comments, and then we'll do a final EIS. Yeah. So, so that's it.